Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Rise Above Justice Movement, the podcast. My name is Zachary Mallory, and I am the host and the founder of the Rise Above Justice Movement and the Rise Above Justice Movement, the podcast. Today, I'll give a viewer discretion is advised due to the nature of the topics that we will be discussing. All right, so another addition to our candidate series in which we're interviewing candidates all across the country that are running for various offices. And I don't know about you, but I'm feeling very energized. I have had some really good conversations over the last, couple weeks. And I was just going to interview like 10, maybe 12 candidates, but happy to report that it's well over 100 plus. And majority of them are running for Congress and the US Senate, including Amanda is running in Alabama. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Likewise. Now, you've been a nurse, and healthcare is obviously a top concern whenever it comes to America, but more importantly, like rural America, right?
Mhm. Yes.
And we need these action driven policies because we need to get to a democracy state. I'll be honest, I don't feel that we ever have been because, well, we have our little moments, right? We have these moments of democracy. We have these moments that we feel like, oh, hell yeah, we're going to be okay. And then the
Right.
very next second, it's like we go right back into capitalism, right?
Whiplash.
Yeah, literally, literally.
Yeah.
And I would love for you just to begin by, and I know this is such a loaded question and this can, kind of go on for a little bit, but feel free to ramble because it's important to do so. What is your story and how has your story influenced you to run for Congress?
Yeah. So my name is Amanda Puszcek, and I am running to represent Alabama's 4th Congressional District in the U.S. House. So I'm running for the U.S. House of Representatives. I am currently running in the reddest district in the country on paper. It is an R plus 37 district. So deep, deep red. And the gentleman who has this seat has had this seat for 30 years. I, like a lot of people, when I went to the polling booth in 2024, I was so incredibly disheartened to not even have options on the ballot. I felt like Democratic leadership, both in my state and nationally, did not take Project 2025 seriously. And it was very clear, it was all laid out in there, the things that this administration intended to do. So I then spent the next few months really looking and crunching numbers and making a obscene amount of spreadsheets and looking to see where my knowledge, where my background skills could be used in the most advantageous reasons. I'm a nurse by trade. I've been a nurse for over 10 years, went to a community college, and I love it. I love nursing so much. It is the best career in the entire world. No one can tell me otherwise. And I usually go to really intense situations. So I work in rural hospitals or psychiatric or prisons, a lot of places that people don't want to work, which means that I've had a lot of the interactions with our social systems that other people haven't. So whether that is the prison system or working in schools or working with reform and trying to make sure that people have legal counsel when they're in these situations, I've worked on the back end of it, of these different interactions with different systems. And yeah, I knew that with Project 2025, that rural healthcare and just healthcare in general was going to be an absolute shambles. So here I am running for Congress to represent Alabama's 4th Congressional District. I'll give you a little bit of background about me just as a person. I have 2 alcoholic parents. I was taught from a really young age that there's a saying in Alcoholics Anonymous to be of service. And that's been something that's stuck with me ever since I was a small child. And that's kind of how I've faced my life, which led me into a career in nursing and has now led me again to a different path than I never thought I would be doing, which is running for political office. But I know that we need people who want to do the right thing. And it feels like that's incredibly lacking in our political arena and certainly in Congress at this time. So, yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Absolutely. What led you to becoming a nurse? Does it stem from like personal experience? Does it stem from, just growing up and just seeing a need? I'm always curious about what kind of like led you. I know you touched on it just briefly, but let's kind of dive into that and then we'll dive into a little bit about your platform. But what's the backstory on becoming a nurse and what was it like going through, like the nursing training and like licensing and etc. And obviously it's deeply expensive, right?
It
Um,
is. It is.
but
I
just walk us through that really quick.
When I was graduating high school, I knew that I wanted to go to college and I knew I wanted to do something, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. And again, my parents were both alcoholics, and there's this saying in Alcoholics Anonymous of to be of service. And that's something that has always really called to me, that your worth is only defined by what you can do for others. And I've reflected and thought about a lot. Okay, what would I be good at, A, and B, what would I really enjoy? What would fulfill me? And that's how I ended up with nursing. I went to a community college. I got my 2-year degree. And then later on during COVID, I was one of many nurses who went to New York City. I was there for about 2 years. Unfortunately, I had, like I said, I work with usually very intense patients. I had an injury with a psychiatric patient while I was there and walked around on a torn ACL for about 2 years because that was considered a not what's the word an optional surgery. What's the word I'm looking for here? I
That's a really good question.
Oh gosh, a non-emergent surgery.
There
There we
we
go.
go.
Jeez, Pete. The medical professional can't even figure out what she's trying to say. That's very concerning. Uh, but while I was there, I ended up getting my bachelor's degree. There was a lot of death and there was a lot of grief, as you can imagine. And going back to school and having something to focus on and write papers and such and rechannel that energy so that I could then go back the next day and take care of patients. So that's what I did. I got my bachelor's degree.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's dive in and talk a little bit about your platform. And I know this is the most exciting part because it appears that a lot of your platform comes from, like what you truly believe as you, right? On
I'm
your
so
website,
incredibly happy to hear that.
on
You
your
always get
website.
worried as a candidate that your intentions may not come across the best, and I try to be very transparent and very open. So I'm incredibly happy to hear that.
Well, it's easy to digest and it's easy to read because literally it's common sense. I mean, anybody would think that, right? Like, oh, my platform is very much common sense because this is the human needs. However, a lot of candidates put together a platform and they're like, yeah, I care about it, but they don't, you know what I mean? But
No, I absolutely agree. I think that what we're used to is politicians placating us with words of "I support X, Y, Z," but they don't ever really
mhm,
present policies that they want to enact. And if you don't tell me the policy that you want to enact, then it becomes much harder for us as constituents and as voters to hold that person accountable.
exactly. Thank you for saying that. That's exactly where I was going with that, which kind of brings up, one of our first topics here in just a second, but there's one I want to touch base for or touch base about before we get to that point, and it's LGBTQ plus rights. And one of the things that has been introduced a couple times in Congress is the Equality Act. And thinking about, the most recent ruling from the Supreme Court, saying, hey, Colorado's ban on conversion therapy may or may not have violated the First Amendment.
Yeah.
Thinking about that, and I speak as a survivor of conversion therapy for 2.5 years. I was not forced to go into it. My mom has always been my biggest ally. I also grew up with a disabled mother, and I also grew up with an alcoholic stepfather that is no longer in my life.
Mm.
My biological father is in prison. I've never met my biological father a day in my life, but I've always had my mom by my side. And she's always affirmed who I was. She's always affirmed who I am. I met my partner close to 8 years ago. And Kansas, I live in the state of Kansas, but I grew up in Missouri. Kansas became one of the first states to bar trans people from having a driver's license that has their true identity on
Yeah.
it. And whenever this bill passed, we have a Democratic governor. However, we have a supermajority of GOP in the state of Kansas, and her override of that bill was overturned. Luckily, my partner's driver's license is in Missouri. However, her birth certificate is most likely going to be impacted. She will most likely have to revert back to the dead name and the gender marker assigned at birth. But thinking about that, the Equality Act would enshrine anti-discrimination protections nationwide and codifying into law about marriage equality and parental rights for LGBTQ plus families. So thinking about that and, obviously affirming healthcare and ending violence and discrimination, it all plays a key role in protecting marginalized communities. So this goes deeper than just LGBTQ plus people, right? It also goes to any marginalized community and it just says, hey, we're going to protect these rights under law by passing this legislation that's going to help enhance people's lives. Because that's ultimately what it's about, right? So let's dive in and talk about some LGBTQ issues that you noticed in Alabama. And I'm gonna be the first to say this. I am not the biggest fan of your governor at all. And I'll talk about that here in just a minute because there's something else I want to highlight with this. But let's kind of talk about some LGBTQ issues in Alabama specifically.
So when uh, I don't even know how to start this. Apologies. I would say in my district. Okay, let me just back up. We can edit all this out. Uh, we know that people are discriminated against, right? We just know that is a fact of life. We know that women are discriminated against at a higher rate than men, and we know that people who are minority or queer are discriminated at even higher percentages. And we've known about this for decades. We have had DEI to try to have some sort of movement towards equity and towards justice, but we just had all of our DEI initiatives overturned. We absolutely need to enshrine the Equality Act. The Equality Act would act as a veto against the overturning of DEI initiatives and ensure that people have these protections. People would just be able to live their lives, not be discriminated against based on their sex, their sexual orientation, or gender identity. I feel like this is very basic stuff. The fact that this legislation has been sitting, waiting to be passed since 2023 and already drafted and ready to go is absolutely mind boggling to me. In my state, the reddest district in the country, one of the things that I hear from people all the time is, I'm terrified for my kid. Someone in their life, usually their child, who is queer, and they are very terrified of the way that this country in general is moving and the treatment of queer people. And we also see things like the executive order that Trump put out talking about how he would like to institutionalize trans people. While we haven't seen any movement on that just yet, I absolutely do think that that little trinket, that breadcrumb that was dropped for us, means that we need to be taking this seriously. And that also means acting before we get to that point. So if we flip the Senate, we flip the House, hopefully both, in this upcoming election, then it is our duty as people who are taking those seats to make real, actual progress and make sure that we are passing things like the Equality Act, as opposed to just clutching our pearls and holding on to our butts going, I hope that everything will be okay. I'm so tired of hearing that from leadership. We know what would make things better. We just need to pass the legislation.
You said a key thing that you would think this would be literally common sense, right? And you would think that in 2026, we wouldn't even have to be talking about these issues, right? It's literally just basic common sense, which obviously brings us to my next point is about Citizens United. And a reason why a lot of those bills are sitting where they are. They're sitting on the desk of these elected members of Congress and the U.S. senators and et cetera, and they're in the file, right? Because of lobbying groups and because of the influence of money in politics, which is why a lot of what's happening now and has happened in years past is because these lobby groups go in and they say, hey, here's a bill. We want you to pass it. We'll give you, XYZ if you do XYZ, right? It's like one of these exchanges, like, here's a bill, but you got to do this in order to get this, right? And
Yeah,
oftentimes that includes, either an endorsement or it includes a check or it includes, a lot of these elected officials do not know what is in the bill that they're trying to pass because they don't pay attention to it because money
yeah,
talks and bullshit walks. Let's be real.
yeah.
Um, so thinking about, the 2010 decision of Citizens United, and if anybody's listening, if you're born before 2010, you were older than Citizens United, and I assure you, it has not always been this way. Um, but thinking about Citizens United and the pathway to overturn Citizens United, because also let's take a second and think about our current makeup of the current Supreme Court.
Mm.
How do we get there, in your opinion? Overturning Citizens United seems like something super simple, right? But it's not. But there are pathways to get to that point and things to get there, and I think a lot of it is, there's like the APAC influence. There's
Mm.
a lot of different things that kind of go into this, but I'm curious to know what your thoughts are and the pathway to get there in a capitalistic society and like trickle down economics and, you know, like billionaire influence. So just curious to know what your thoughts are on this.
So I have actually signed a part of a pledge called BACK, which is bringing balance and accountability back to Congress, because I do feel like this is a multi-layered issue. We know that the sheer amount of money that is in politics right now is influencing elections. Now, the good news is we're also seeing for the first time since Citizens United came into being that money is no longer the ultimate deciding factor. What I mean by that is we are seeing money just being shoved into a lot of these races and then the person running getting creamed in the election, which is fantastic news. However, that also doesn't mean that we can let up on the gas, right? We know that this is an issue. We need to get the money out of politics. And one of the pathways that we can do that is by making sure that Congress is held to the code of ethics and revisiting the code of ethics, making it so that they can't receive donations from private corporations or private entities beyond a certain threshold, making sure that I would really like to see cryptocurrency no longer being accepted by Congress or by any public official just because of the anonymity associated with it, right? That's the same reason why people want to donate crypto. But not having any transparency there. Also, you're the people who are supposed to be regulating it, and you're not regulating it and taking donations in. That's very conflict of interest. I don't like that at all. Uh, and then some other steps that we need to do is making sure that people have that these representatives have a moratorium on lobbying so that they can't return back to Congress and start lobbying the minute they leave the door. They can't turn around, say, now I'm a lobbyist, and then walk right back in that same door. And the reason why I say all of these things kind of combine is it makes it so there's less incentive to make corrupt decisions, to make self-interest decisions, because there would be less benefit for the person making these decisions. We just need a drastic overhaul in the way that we do our political system and trying to keep money out of it. Right now, we definitely have a situation where our president is bringing in billions of dollars with negotiations and contracts with other countries. That is such a conflict of interest, and it's so blatant and brazen.
To build a freaking ballroom,
And an arch. You forgot the arch. We also
to
get an arch. Don't worry.
to build a goddamn ballroom, and I can't even begin to tell you that people are struggling. healthcare, housing, food, clothing, childcare. The list goes on, right?
So many problems that we have
And
in
we're
this.
focused on a ballroom. It blows my
Correct.
mind. But
Don't worry, we're also really cool about like genociding
yes,
other people. So
absolutely.
I guess those are our two priorities for our funding right now.
Speaking of which, there's a lot going on, like internationally, right? There's
All
a
the
lot
time.
going on in
Mhm.
the country. There's a lot going on internationally. In regards to like the APAC influence in Congress, um, thinking about that, and there's also like J Street and like a lot of these other like packs that go along with APAC, right?
Right.
We see a lot of this influence in that. And, what are your current thoughts on like Israel, your current thoughts on, Gaza and what's happening there? And let's kind of talk about that for a little bit.
It has been a wild ride. I feel like I became more knowledgeable about APAC in the last couple of
Mm-hmm.
years. And I think that this year in particular, we've seen the curtain pulled back and more people are aware of it now than ever. Right now, we have been sending billions of dollars to Israel, and Israel is using it to genocide the Palestinian people. And we are apparently okay with that as we continue to give them money. And now we're seeing that same action and that same cruelty being used in Lebanon.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been to be on the candidate side and actually see the amount of money being thrown around. It's been very revealing. I will be honest. It's been very revealing. It's one thing to sit there and read the numbers on a page, right? Someone got $50,000 from APAC or $25,000 from APAC or whatever the case may be. And it's always, to be very clear, it's always a large sum of money, right? It's not some little $50 donation. And I've seen it firsthand in the way that it influences people, how they talk about things, their decisions as towards voting. And for the record, I will not be accepting any APAC donations, period.
Yay!
I have not, I will not. That is just not for me. And, but I've seen what that actually means in real life. It's been extremely disheartening. And
Mm-hmm.
we've got to bring some crackdown. At this point, I think we can be very blunt and say that it is a foreign influence.
Mm-hmm.
That is what APAC is operating as currently, is a
Mm-hmm.
foreign influence in our country. We as a country are very chest beating, protect ourselves, America first, that sort of thing. But then we're allowing Israel to influence our government.
Mm-hmm.
Huge conflict of interest. And then now we're in a world war. I mean that because now we're in multiple countries across the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're seeing people, civilians, being killed non discriminately. I think that
Mm-hmm.
America needs to look at itself really hard in the mirror and make a decision as to what we want to do because I, for one, do not support the genocide or policing or brutality against other human beings in foreign countries or against here or against people in our own country. We're talking about internalized violence, right? When we're talking about like
Mm-hmm.
ICE or DHS or the prison system. Both of these are terrible systems, and that's what happens when you have imperialism that turns inward.
Eerie. And it's an imperial boomerang, right? And thinking about this, you bring up a cute thing, and it kind of leads into I'm going to shift up the order of things that I wanted to talk about. But talking about ICE and DHS, what have you seen in your district in regards to like ICE raids? I mean, we've seen what happened in Minneapolis,
Right.
in California, in Chicago, New York, Portland, Oregon, North Carolina, South Carolina, etc. We've been watching this for like the last what year and a half almost, and just thinking about this, there's a lot of conversation around ICE funding and a lot of DHS. And again, if you're born before 2003, you're older than the Department of Homeland Security.
Yep.
And it was created out of spite and out of fear and was created under the quote unquote Patriot Act. So thinking about this, what have you seen in your district and in Alabama? And from your vision as candidate, what would you propose as far as DHS, ICE, Border Patrol, FEMA, TSA? Because it's all under DHS, which is insane to me.
Yeah.
I feel that it needs to be broken up, and there's certain things we as a country function without, well, supposedly function without DHS, but FEMA should be its own entity. It should not be under Department of Homeland Security. That's insane to me. And then, but yeah, just walk me through what you've seen in Alabama and from your perspective in your district.
So this is going to be very rambly, but I promise there's a line of cohesion. So the first thing, I think that you're 110% right. We need to separate these agencies more. The fact that they're interrelated and all of their funding should be shared amongst them for TSA and FEMA and for ICE agents, it just makes no sense to me, right? They have very different goals and very different purposes. They need to be separated. They just need to be separated. I think that would make sure that these agencies can continue without disruption. I also think that it would help them function better to have specialized leadership that actually understands what each agency does, as opposed to a group of people over all of them, again, with them having so many different purposes that they serve, right? If we're talking about the way that an organization functions and how it operates, you want people to understand what the purpose of that organization is and be very clearly in their lane, right? What I see in my district is that we are treated very differently than a Minneapolis or New York City or Chicago or any sort of an urban area. And the reason for that being is because we are so rural. The way that ICE typically functions in our district is it's very small raids, it's very one-on-one, and because everything is so rural and spread out, the chances of someone actually being there and catching something on camera are pretty low. With that being said, across our state, we have different micro watches that us as regular constituents, regular citizens have set up. And when any sort of alert goes out in a particular area, people do try to show up and film. Again, it's kind of difficult just because of how large we are. The chances of someone even finding out that ICE is there and then being able to catch them on camera is lower. Now, the biggest places that our raids are currently is usually at schools, not walking into schools, but waiting for parents to pick up their children from school. And this has caused a massive problem in our district because we have hundreds of students who are no longer attending school because their parents are fearful that something will happen to them or their children, which means that we have hundreds of kids who are no longer getting a public education. What that feeds into is another problem that we have in our district, which is that the state of Alabama seems really keen on bringing back child labor. And so when we saw this great disappearance of students from our public school systems, which also, of course, then drains the amount of money that the public school is getting. But then we didn't hear any sort of news about where these students had ended up at because they just disappeared off the roll, right? But then at several of our local plants, including poultry plants, that's where the kids went. Working underneath the table, working hours with dangerous machinery, and when they should have been in school. That's what happens to our kids. And then the last aspect of this is we actually have a detention center here in our state, in our district, which is wild because we had one several years ago and it got closed down. The reason why it got closed down was because of the way that people being held there were being treated. So that's reopened. Not great. In that particular facility are, I don't want to say inmates because that's incorrect, right? These are people. These are just people waiting to see what in the heck this government is doing with them. And a lot of times they don't have access to legal counsel. A lot of times they don't have access to any sort of communication. For men, they are on a 1,200 calorie per day diet. They are often wasting away for months at a time. Any communication that is sent to them, usually via letter, is not given to them until they are about to be deported. So whether it's their actual legal counsel or family members or anything like that, they have no way of being notified until they are quite literally on a plane to another country. That is how our detention center here works. I can't speak for any other detention center. I can only speak about our detention center. So this is a multifaceted issue that is affecting so many different areas in our state. But because it's quiet, because it's not super newsflash worthy, right? We don't see large groups of people protesting against ICE as an event is occurring. It just isn't getting the attention here, and that's very much by design.
Mm-hmm. Which literally everything is by design, right?
Yeah.
Whenever we think about it, and whenever we think about these functions, it's literally by design.
Yeah.
You mentioned about rural, and you said that a lot of your district is rural, correct?
It is.
So whenever I think about rural America, I think about hospitals closing. I think about a lot of food deserts in a lot of areas too. And obviously, I do not know a lot about Alabama. I do know one of my team members is based in Alabama, and she's worked with wrongfully incarcerated people. I'll find out what district she's in, and I'll fill you in on that here in a little bit, like outside of here. But um, in 2023, the Progressive Democrats of America, in partnership with Rural Urban Bridge Initiative, they introduced a thing titled the Rural New Deal. And it's a 10 pillar policy platform designed to reverse decades of economic decline and cultivate long-term rural and small town prosperity and resilience through federal investment in bottom-up solutions. So this is from pdaamerica.org. Those 10 pillars include rebuild farm, forest, and food economies, reward work and ensure livable wages, dismantle monopolies, empower and support local business, invest in community and regional infrastructure, rebuild small town centers, cultivate self-reliance and resilience, invest in rural healthcare, fully fund rural schools, make rural and small town housing affordable, and relocalize rural and small town banks. Hearing these pillars, what do you think about this, first of all? And then secondly, does this sound like what you are hearing from your constituents and what they're thinking about? And whenever you're out canvassing, this was going to be my last question, but I got a couple more before we get there. But I'm going to kind of revert this into this. But whenever you're out canvassing, are you hearing some of these things, or what are you hearing from whenever you're out canvassing and talking to voters?
Okay. So there's a lot to unpack here, and I want to make sure that I'm doing this accurately. This is actually a huge part of what I canvass and when I'm having conversations with voters. And what I mean by that is giving education. Okay. So in my district, people very much recognize the problems, right? They recognize, hey, we don't have access to internet. We don't have access to clean water. That's right. It's a 50-50 chance when I turn on my spout what color it's going to be. Is it going to be clear? Is it going to be brown? We don't know what's going to happen with these hospitals. Right now in my district, we have 10 hospitals that are getting ready to close, which would have 10 entire counties without hospitals in our district. We're talking about a 2.5-hour drive one way to get medical care. And that's also the largest employer usually for the area. So it also has an economic factor. So when we're having this sort of larger discussion of rural problems and how do we begin to fix them, it's a lot of education on my part as to what would help and why. When we talk about rural hospitals closing, rural hospitals in my district and in the state of Alabama are primarily funded by Medicaid. That is the largest payer. The reason why that's the largest payer is that employers are not required to offer insurance. And you may or may not know this, but the Affordable Care Act is no longer affordable after the most recent changes. We also had huge cuts to Medicaid. So this creates a bit of a domino effect. A lot of people without insurance, no longer able to pay for healthcare. So they're not going to hospitals, and or they're going to hospitals and the hospital's not being reimbursed, which will lead to hospitals closing. If a hospital closes in that area, not only does that decrease the quality of life for everyone living there, that also makes sure that the largest employer is now gone in that region, meaning that families can't stay together. People who want to stay in their hometown find that they don't have the economic opportunity that they would have had 30, 40 years ago. And the last piece of that problem is the fact that 80% of healthcare workers who live 100 miles from the Alabama border work in another state, i.e., we have healthcare workers, but they can't afford to live here. And the reason why they can't afford to live here is we are one of the least paying states in the entire country. Right now, our local hospital systems, they start off at about $22 an hour. You started off anywhere else in the country, we're talking about starting at $50 to $75 an hour, and in some states as much as $150 an hour. Meaning that the wages have just not kept up here. So how do we begin to solve all of these problems? Because they are interconnected, but it all leads to one problem, right? Hospitals. So the way that we begin to fix this problem is, one, we've got to move towards universal healthcare, y'all. That's the future. Do you know what the most affordable healthcare is? Free healthcare. Not only would that keep our hospitals open, it would have more equitable healthcare, more access to healthcare, especially in these rural communities. It would be a huge economic boon for these communities. And it would ensure that these hospitals will stop having band-aids thrown on them and are kept open for generations to come. Another thing that we need to do is we need to increase the federal minimum wage so that that can work as a veto power and increase wages here in Alabama, where the minimum wage is currently $7.50 an hour, I believe, for like our childcare workers and our auxiliary healthcare members. They usually start off about $8 an hour to $9 an hour, which makes paying bills like gas or your rent or your utilities extremely hard to do, especially because our utility rates have the third highest in the entire country, which is kind of wild considering it's Alabama. You would never think that. So all of these things kind of working together at the federal level to make sure that we're keeping these hospitals open, they're funded for generations to come so that they'll always be there, making sure that they are a lifeline for these communities and for these small towns, a lifeline that literally keeps people alive.
Literally a lifeline, you know?
Yeah.
Again, a lot of this is just such common sense, and we shouldn't even be having this conversation. But I'm glad we are, because this has been very eye-opening to me.
Here's the thing is I can't speak for any other district in the country, right? But I can tell you right now that my district, why would the incumbent educate them? He's had the seat for 30 years, right? Doing the bare minimum for them. It did not behoove him to let people know that they could have options if that would take money out of his pocket, right? So it then becomes a double duty as someone who is now running as a challenger to educate, to give actual options, to give solutions, and to get people fired up. Making this a heavier lift than a lot of races, but we have to. Every single seat in this country, we can flip. Okay, this is a game of sweat. This is a game of perseverance. This is a game of consistency, and we can do it. It's just going to take time and effort, and I'm willing to put that in.
And your current incumbent is Robert Adderholt, right?
Yes.
Mhm. And like you said, oh Jesus Christ, he assumed office on January 3rd, 1997,
Uh huh.
literally a year after I was born. Um, or a little less than a year after I was born. I was born in '96. I'll be 30 this year. So, oh my Lord, thinking about oh God, I'm about to go down a whole rabbit hole. Right now, I'm currently screwing
Whole
or
rabbit hole. He's got like a documentary on him. You'll be here all day.
um his election in 2016. He ran unopposed. It looks like like on the GOP side.
Right.
Um, it looks like for a lot of this, he's ran unopposed,
Absolutely.
and now here you are giving being like that kind of like that thorn in the right side. Like what, you're gonna freaking work for the damn people, or you need to get the hell out of the way and
Exactly.
let progress begin to happen. Because it sounds like this district has been neglected for a very long time. Like you physically have a representative, but are you working for the people? I mean, it's very obvious that it's not. And you've been in office for 29 years. Oh, Lord. Okay, we're going to move past this. So, jumping in and thinking about Alabama, I recently watched a documentary that is titled The Alabama Solution. And this is a 2025 American documentary film. And it debuted at the 2025 Sundance Film Festival on January 28th and was released by HBO and HBO Max on October 10th. I sat down and watched this, and whenever I tell you, I felt the hair on my arms literally stand up the entire time. It rings so many bells. These men approached these producers. They attended um, the Easterling Correctional Facility there in Alabama to film a religious revival meeting. But during that visit, these incarcerated men approached them off camera with accounts of abuse and systemic failures within the prison system. They then launched a 6-year investigation, and during that time, they used contraband cell phones to document conditions and communicate with the filmmakers. And they turned this in to this documentary that I've watched twice now. And the Free Alabama movement is something that I look up to because this is something that I watch very closely.
Yeah.
And there was a 2016 US prison strike. And ever since then, a part of my focus has been on criminal justice reform and abolishing private prisons. This is something that I believe wholeheartedly in. My mom also watched this documentary with me, and she looked at me and she said, "Oh my God." And thinking about how much money your current governor has made off of these men that are in these facilities and women too, I'm sure it's on the flip side, in the women's prisons too. I'm sure it's the exact same, if not worse. And thinking about this, and I believe you mentioned that before we started recording, you mentioned that you've also watched this documentary. What was your reactions whenever you're thinking about what's currently happening in these for-profit systems, not just the healthcare system, but also in these private prisons and these for-profit prisons? What was your thoughts while you were watching this documentary?
I had to work up myself up to even watching it, to be honest with you. Um, I had seen the trailer and had been in interactions and in places with people who were involved with the film, family members, production team, and I had kind of gathered just a small inkling of what the film would be like, right? And it took me quite a while to even work myself up to sit down and watch it, and I did. I sat down and watched it one evening, and I think the thing that made me the most angry is that none of it was surprising to me. I've worked in a prison. I've worked in prisons before, rather, and this is not uncommon behavior, especially not in our state. I wish that this had been some sort of a great revelation to me, but it wasn't. And the fact that it was so very clearly documented and was so prolific and so obvious that even other people could finally see it who hadn't worked in the prison system, who hadn't engaged with that population and truly seen and understood what they are enduring in these torture facilities. It it makes my blood boil and it made my stomach turn. What we are seeing in Alabama in our prison systems is just modern day slavery, right? I feel like we can call it that because a lot of times these inmates are forced to work for basically no pay, that the prisons then just eat up all of that money. And the crazy thing is they will essentially rent out these inmates to large corporations. So McDonald's, Burger King, Walmart, these people are out in the community working jobs, unsupervised, 8, 12-hour days before they go back to the prison. So you're telling me that they can spend all of that time in the community 5 days a week, but we have to keep them in a prison? For what? It's so obvious that if they are safe enough to go out and work in the community unsupervised, then they are safe enough to leave prison, right? It's incredibly infuriating, but I'm very grateful for the documentary because I do believe that it has brought so much attention and light onto an issue that has been sort of an open secret for a long time in our state. So it is, gosh, it just, I'm sorry. I get upset when I talk about this because to see another human being treated in such a manner, whether it was in an ICE detention facility or an actual prison, is just infuriating. And it's not something that any of us should be standing for or allowing to happen. So like I said, this is an ongoing problem that a lot of us have known about for a long time, but us finally having a bit of a spotlight on it means that this is the time to make actionable change.
Mm-hmm.
It is time to really push for change. And I'm seeing that both at the federal level, like candidates who are running for state, or I'm sorry, that are running for the Senate or running for the House. And I also see that in the state legislature as well. We have people
Mm-hmm.
running all over the ballot that are genuinely passionate about prisoner reform. And so, it then becomes our job as constituents and voters to really get behind these candidates and put them in power because
You
that's
have
where the change happens.
you have some really good candidates that are running in Alabama.
Listen, I'm so glad you said that because bragging on my other candidates is one of my favorite things to do. Alabama is getting it this year, y'all.
Yes, and I am so excited to see this. The energy that is coming from Alabama right now is setting a tone for what is to come. And there is some massive organizing that is happening. It's so exciting to see.
Right?
A couple people, including yourself, is a part of this candidate series. And I am grateful to have the opportunity to sit down and talk to a lot of these candidates, not only from Alabama, but across the country, because every single election matters. And whenever we think about John Lewis, okay, I want to dive into some voting rights. This will be the last question for you because I know we're coming up on time here in just a minute. But whenever we think about John Lewis and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, I believe that's what it's titled. Whenever we think about that, what does voting rights really look like? Like, what do you see whenever you go vote at the polls? What do you see? What do you hear? And what can improve?
I think that, oh, oh my gosh, I don't want to take up too
Mhm.
much of your time because I could be here forever. Uh, okay, there's a lot of different things that we can unpack here, and I think that we need to start with federally, and I think we need to recognize the point that we're at in currently, which is that we have people who are calling for major changes to elections and how we conduct elections. And it's very clearly to try to bully people out of going to the polls. And we're seeing that in the federal government, and then we're seeing that also in my state legislature. What we need is less barriers to voting, not more, period. 110%, I back that. It is our constitutional right to participate in democracy in this country. In my personal and humble opinion, we should have weekend voting, which my state does not have. We should have more mail-in ballots and absentee ballots. That should be an easier process, not more convoluted. You should not have to have these state-issued IDs or special IDs to vote, especially when we're talking about because every state is so different. And we need to make sure that people are actually able to leave work and go vote. It should be a national holiday whenever it's voting, right? Especially if we're talking like midterms or we're talking about a federal election. It should be a holiday. Now, with all of these things being said, right now, the Trump administration is sending out a message that everyone should be wary and that your voting rights are probably under attack. And at the very least, sowing these seeds of mistrust. Now, the intention behind sowing these seeds of mistrust is so that people are unsure if their vote will count and will stay home. Because they're scared, y'all. They're sweating. This administration and absolutely every single capitulator to this administration is sweating. They know that we, the people, are pissed off. And they want to disenfranchise as many people and keep as many people from attending the polling booth as possible. We do not need to make it easy for them. We, the people, cannot just throw our hands in the air and go, well, I don't know if elections are going to happen. I'm making the plan that elections are. And I'm making the plan that I'm dragging everyone that I know to go and make sure that their voice is heard. And that is the way that we should be approaching this. Because if the numbers are overwhelming and everyone shows up to vote, it does not matter how much someone calls and says, well, this was false or whatever sort of shenanigans, because we know there's going to be shenanigans, right? Whatever the shenanigans are, we have to be so loud and so decisive that it is impossible to go around. It is impossible to ignore.
You said a key thing, and I want to pinpoint this. And this is oh gosh, absolutely yes. And it's so incredibly important. So important. Now, the last thing is how can people contribute to your campaign, first of all? And then secondly, how can people assess the work that you are doing? Because you are doing a phenomenal campaign, and this platform is, for the people. It's not for a corporation. It's not for a PAC. It's not paid for by a PAC. It's literally that pure grassroots, because we need to bring integrity to politics for the very first time. Because in all honesty, and I learned this yesterday or the other day whenever I was interviewing another candidate, I said we need to bring back integrity. And she said, wait a second. No, we've never had integrity. So, and her name is Shoni Williams, and she's running for Congress in California. And she was wrongfully incarcerated, and now she's using her rage to run for office.
Hell yeah.
And it opened my eyes a lot. So now I'm going to say we need to bring integrity to politics. So thinking about that, how can people contribute to your campaign and uplift the work that you are doing and follow you on social media?
So I would like to start off by saying that right now there are more regular people, just lay people, running all over the country, which means that we have an opportunity to make real, actual change. When we put regular people into office, people who haven't had a silver spoon in their mouth their whole life or haven't ever really interacted with the peasants, as someone called us the other day. I say someone because it was a voter that I was engaging with. He said, "Thank you so much for coming out today and hanging out with us peasants." And I said, "Well, I am the peasant." Of course I'm here. I am the peasant. And I think that that's so important, right? It's just having more regular people in office. And so that becomes our job then as people who are voters to make sure that we're getting them in office, right? We want our voice heard. We want the good things to happen. So we got to get people in office. So you can support me by going to amandaforalabama.com. That's Amanda, F-O-R, Alabama.com. And you can check your voter status if you live in the state of Alabama. You can donate, you can shop. I'm not going to lie, I have some pretty cute merch. Holler, you probably want to check it out. And you can donate to this campaign. My campaign is truly a grassroots. I am trying very desperately not to beg for money from people because I realize just how hard things are right now.
Mm-hmm.
One of the other things that you can do that is extremely helpful for grassroots candidates, progressive candidates, especially right now where we are on the timeline, is interacting with our social media. I'll be honest with you, our ratios have just flipped in like the last few months. We are no longer, a lot of us aren't getting the sort of traction that we used to. We're not getting the sort of engagement that we used to because the algorithms have changed, which really sucks. It's one of the easiest things that you can do as a lay person anywhere in the country is liking and sharing our social media. And it does a huge, huge lift for us. So you can donate at amandaforalabama.com, or you can share on any of my social media platforms, and all of those are linked as well. But the most important thing that you right now can do is check your voter registration. Make sure that you are registered, that you know where to go, that you have whatever documentation that your state requires, and then show up in your primary. For me, it's May 19th, and I imagine that our state is going to have a runoff, so again in June. So if you have any close races, also be aware of when your runoff might be. Do not let this opportunity go by. Do not squander our chance to make a difference. All of us need to show up to vote in our primary and our runoffs and in the general again in November. And yeah, this has been a blast. I'm so proud of Alabama, and I'm so proud of the United States. We are living through a time where I think I keep going back to when I was reading history books when I was a kid. And I always used to say, well, you know, that sort of pondering that I feel like a lot of us do of, I don't know if I would be the difference, or I think I'd be this, or I think I'd be that. If I was in this situation in Nazi Germany, I'd do this, or whatever the case may be. And now's the time to put up or shut up. Truly.
Mm-hmm.
We have to put up or shut up. And I refuse to be complicit, and I refuse to be silent. And I highly encourage you to join me on this campaign, and this campaign for democracy across our country. And yeah, let's get to work, y'all.
Oh, I love this. I love your energy.
Yeah.
And that's the energy that we need to be having. This conversation has been really eye-opening for me, just so you know.
I'm
And
glad to hear that.
I'm gonna take it with me, and I'm gonna process what you talked about, because there's a lot that you covered in just a little over an hour, and I'm so glad that we did. And I feel like we could do this in a whole series.
Absolutely. Do you feel more informed? Do you feel more
Yes.
empowered?
I know I definitely do, and I feel like I have a better understanding of what's going on in Alabama just based off of your answers, and just kind of seeing it and having this conversation. It's opened my eyes a lot. You know, like I said at the beginning, Alabama is oftentimes left out of the conversation and is an overlooked state, but there is so much power in that state, you know, that's running at all levels, you know, from your local school board to, you know, the state legislature to governor. You know, there's a lot of work that's happening and a lot of
It's
organizing.
all of this power is just bubbling under the surface. And when you have a
Mhm.
state like Alabama that has had a majority of Republicans for the last decade and have been neglected by Republicans who have held office. And then we also have the Democratic Party who doesn't want to show up and fight for this district or for the state because they feel like they're resigned to Republicans.
Mhm.
People are so tired and fed up and ready for change, and it's our job to make that happen for them.
Absolutely. All right. But with that said, good luck in your primary. I look forward to continue watching you, and you have an open invite,
Heck yeah.
to collaborate with us on social media as well. And you mentioned a little bit ago. I'm just going to add this little tidbit in there. We have close to 400,000 followers on our Instagram. However, our viewership has dropped by over 60% in the last 2 months because the
It's a real
censorship
thing.
is so incredibly real on meta platforms that it is insane. So thank you for mentioning that just a little bit ago. But other than that, please take care of yourself. And again, you have an open invite. I look forward to doing a follow-up conversation with you after the primaries. And with that, your donate link, your website, and your social media handles will be in the description of this podcast episode. So anybody is able to find that there. Please uplift and follow Amanda on social media. Please donate if you are able to, or share with somebody who can. Or like Amanda said, just share the content and let people know, like, hey, Alabama's doing this damn thing, and it's going to continue happening.
Let's
So,
go.
but with that, please take care of yourself, and I'll see you on social media.